I know my child very well, and it's just like, but do you know them really? You can't have your eyes everywhere. They might have a whole different life of their own that might have even led them going down the wrong path. And welcome back to another episode of Breaking the Silence with me, Queenie, and
Spencer.
And we are back with another interesting topic this week of single parent households and the rise in this situation. So kind of opening up the conversation when it comes to this topic, because I know it's a very heavy conversation that people often have, but like, what are the first initial thoughts that kind of come to your mind when we present this issue on the table?
Yeah. So for myself, first thing that comes to mind is, how did we get into this situation? You know, how is it that we see that there's a lot of single parent households within the UK and other places in the world too. And it's more or less, how have we got into this situation that it's gone so, I wouldn't say it's so bad, but there's predominantly a lot of black households in the community that are single households. What's going on? You know, and I was doing some research. I was looking around about this, and what I actually have found here, which I'll read for you now, is that within each ethnic group that's been monitored, the percentage of family types which are single parents are as follows. You see, a black is 24%, mixed 19%, other and white both 10%, and Asian 8%.
Right.
Which is a massive difference.
Yeah, you can see already that the black demographic is at the top. It's the highest percentage there.
Yeah.
And that's a real issue.
Yeah. That
needs to be addressed clearly, and kind of like when we start to think about some of the issues that lead up to single parenthood, because I'm sure it wasn't always intended to be like that for most like households, and you know, even thinking about myself, like I was raised in a single parent household, and it just, well, eventually it didn't start out that way. I was, you know, with both my parents, but eventually it became a single parent household in that I actually lived with my dad.
Okay.
So it was quite different, whereas generally you know that it's the mum that kind of gets left off with the children, or the situation ends up like that. And kind of like the cascade of issues that kind of come out of that. For example, so kind of just talking about that a little bit, like in terms of your question, like how have we gotten here? What do you think has enabled it to get here?
Yeah, I think there has clearly been issues within relationships within black communities, and it's more or less as to what has actually caused those issues. You know, is it just the likes of communication hasn't been well, or could it be a situation that relationships from the get-go moved too quickly? You know, and I think these are all situations, or they're both things that, you know, happen that could cause this. But it's more or less, how can we sort of frame a mindset for our people to actually think long-term life? I think, and this is me personally, I think that maybe a lot of times if there's an argument within a relationship or before the relationship has really taken a hold, but there hasn't been much thought into the future of what the relationship could actually become. Is there going to be children involved? Is there marriage involved? And stuff like this. It's very much, do I like the person? Does the person like me? Are we getting along? and then it turns sexual very quick.
Very quickly, yeah.
Intimacy gets, it's almost like
the first thing.
Exactly. And then before you know it, a child's in the way, and then because you haven't really been able to get to know each other that well, you then start to see that I may not be compatible with this person, and then you end up separating.
Yeah.
Or something goes very, very wrong, whereas the man does something completely wrong that he shouldn't do, and then at that instant, the main thing there is that instant separate.
I have to separate, I have to leave one another, and then the person that gets to suffer that, apart from the two parents, is the child, which they didn't even ask for in the first place. And that then leads to kind of the issues, especially in the UK, where we deal with like antisocial behaviour or lack of employment, or just a whole host of things where young people struggle in these departments, is because of a decision that happened many, many years ago before their existence. And that's not to say that, people, us being here today, like, was an accident or anything like that. I think, intended, they're here now, but kind of like these conversations, like you rightly said, like, they're not had. It's crazy though, because when I talk to some of my mates now, like, we say things like, when I meet someone, we're going to, date or court or whatever for 5-10 years before we do anything or settle down or get married, and then this has to happen by this time, and and it's just like, because we've set these massive expectations for ourselves and put everything to a timeline, and within that said timeline, you could be dating someone for 10 years and you still don't know them.
Yeah, that's very true. What do you think actually happens within a situation like that is causing, the single parenthood to be the direction to go in a sense, like from your understanding, obviously, as you said, you grew up in single parenthood. What were some of the things that you found happened within that, and do you feel that there's a side of emptiness from maybe not having so much of one of your parents in your life or in the household growing up?
Yeah, I mean, definitely in reflection, like, and I think a lot of people can resonate with this, in that when you're raised with either your dad or your mum as a sole parent, as a single parent, you do feel that there's a presence that should be filled, but it isn't, and you don't really know why. And at the time, I was a child, like I was 5, and it's just sort of like, well, I'm happy that I'm with my parent, like the one that's there, like I'm happy that they're here, and things are exciting, the person cares for me, and I don't really understand why there aren't two parents. And when you go to school and your friends are like, oh, mum and dad did this for me, or mum and dad took me XYZ, and you're just like, well, it was just my dad, or it was just my mum. Like, I've been in those situations, and it really does hurt. But when you're younger, you don't understand. But then growing up, having my own experience, seeing other people's experience, and kind of like what leads people into certain life choices or life directions, like you clearly see that essentially the common ground is everybody needed the presence of both their parents. And even though in this ideal world that we live in now, like, that didn't happen for most people, there are still so many unanswered questions. Like, even for me, like, there are unanswered questions from my parents as to, all right, you guys didn't work out, but did you just think it was okay to just make your decision without including me? Fair enough. As a child, like, most from what I've observed anyway, most broken down homes that result into single parenthood families, like, the children are often very young. Most cases, some of them, they might be a bit older, but obviously when you're younger, you don't really have a say in the matter. It's like, whatever happens. And like you said, like, they rush into it so quickly, and they rush out of it so quickly without thinking of all the consequences, and then not even realizing that later on down the line, that child is going to ask questions.
Yeah, that's true. So what's your thoughts? Because I've also heard that, because I know a lot of people as well that also grew up in single households. And when I'm actually talking to a lot of them, one thing that they did tell me is that they didn't feel whole and complete in terms of the love that they received. It always felt as if, like, there was a side missing. Like, did you experience the same thing too?
Yeah,
Or?
100%. Like there is that part missing.
Yeah.
Sometimes you know it because obviously it's your mum or your dad, and you want both your parents there. Sometimes you know that there's a void, but you just don't understand what it is if you were younger. And then even past that whole relationship breakdown with my parents, leading me and my sibling, my sister, to end up in foster care, and that happens for so many people. But fortunately for us, we ended up being adopted, but by another single parent.
Yeah. Oh,
which was really interesting.
Okay.
Because usually, like most adoptions, you think both parents be there, but our adopted parent she was a mum, like she was just the sole adopted parent, basically.
Wow.
She decided to adopt as a single parent, and it would have been interesting. Sadly, she passed away, but it would be interesting to know why she chose to adopt as a single parent. And for us growing up, it was interesting because it was annoying in the sense, because it was kind of like she was always busy and she kind of had her own life, but it's like, well, why adopt because when you're raising a child, obviously it takes both parents for an ideal household, but if that isn't the case, it can be a strain. I think most women, for example, they'll be like, I can do it by myself, I'm independent, I've got this. They have this strong mentality that they can handle the situation, which is fair enough, and granted, you give them that, they're capable of doing it. But in all honesty, I personally don't agree that that is the case. Like there will come time where you would have needed that other person in the relationship. I think for us, eventually our adopted mum, she got married, and she said to us one day, here's your new daddy. And we were like, okay, because we've grown up all these years without one. And it's just like, well, what does that mean? And I know that we have a dad already. He's somewhere out in the world. But it's just like, well, okay, there's this new person now. And her intention, from what she had said at the time, was that, you need that father figure. And it's like, understandably, but you can't just introduce someone. And I think, even from statistics, I was having a read earlier, it kind of said that most single parents, if they were widowed, for example, they're more likely to remarry. But if you were divorced or separated, or something happened, or even if you didn't get married and you separated, they're more likely to remain a single parent.
Wow, okay.
And then later down the line, you find most households find it, your parent, if it's a mum, for example, she'll want to have a partner, like a companion. And they kind of just introduce that companion into the situationship. Again, without the children's, like, not that they need consent, but without having that conversation of how that might affect the child. Do you know what I mean?
That's eye-opening, and I think as well is on that basis, single parenthood, I think there's a balance as to what every relationship needs, especially when there's children involved as well. We all know that, a child needs to see the both of best worlds, in terms of he needs to experience the love and the feminine side from the mother, but also needs to experience the love and the masculine side from the father as well. But gets very, very difficult when you've now got sort of a single parent, or i.e. be a single mother, in a sense, who's now having to do both sides.
Jobs,
You know what I'm saying? Which it's very, very difficult. I think it's difficult for any woman, And but what do you think in terms of the single parenthood and how the child actually grows up? And do you think that the negatives of that could be as to what I have heard in the sense of a lot of children who've grown up in single parenthood actually end up joining gangs and stuff like that, so getting into the crime and stuff. What are your thoughts?
There is that stereotype, isn't there? Because there was that breakdown in relationship, therefore their future might not be secured, or they'll end up going down the wrong path, and all of it kind of goes down to choice. I think even if you had both parents there, that saying where it says it takes a village to raise a child, it takes the community to look out for one another, regardless of the situation. But then when it comes to the outcome of that child, especially if it's a young man, like if it's a young boy, they'll say, oh well, nothing good is going to come out from that. And I really detest that, even though there are cases where that might be true. If you look at it as a whole, you'll find that either that single parent wasn't supported. I even came across another article which said that, you know, most single parent households, if it's a mum especially, that they have a huge support system. And I was like, well, actually, that might be true for some people, but not for everybody.
True.
And for those that don't have that support from their community or family or whatever, their children, obviously they're not going to, if they're relying solely on their mum, who might be working 2-3 jobs if they come from a low income background, has a lot going on, has to think about raising this child or children if there are many of them. And it's kind of like, it's hard, like you said, it's hard on them to take both the mum and dad role in that situation. So there might be things that they miss in their child. Like, I know some people say things like, well, I know my child very well, they won't do this, they won't do that. And it's just like, but do you know them really? You can't have your eyes everywhere.
It's true.
You know, they might have a whole different life of their own that might have even led them going down the wrong path, and then they engage in all these antisocial behaviours and things like that. And it's just like, you can't put 100% blame on the parent because it's a lot, but at the same time you can't say that you know everything, or it's a hard one, do you know what I'm saying? But again, I'm kind of going back to choice, because it's for anyone, even for myself or people that I know. Like, you can choose bad and you can choose good at the same, not at the same time. You can choose bad or you can choose good. And I think what will help make that decision is the support of your community at the end of the day. Do you know what I mean?
Okay. So, I mean, I agree 100%. And I'm thinking on the basis of that, we've established that a lot of this comes down to relationship. It all starts off as a relationship. And it's more or less as to, what do you think would be some key things that you think, when getting into a relationship, that man and woman needs to really focus on, pay a lot of attention to, before actually committing and actually thinking about bringing another life into this world?
So interesting you say that, because for most people they're kind of like, you have to have communication, like you have to all these things, you have to be intertwined, in community, as we say, equally yoked, like you have to be on the same page with your partner and things like that. And it's just like, personally, I think before all else, if you decide to be in a relationship with someone and you're young or whatever the case might be, I think it's having to identify who you are as a person before you attach yourself to someone else. And other people can have different takes on this or different perspectives, but I personally think that if you don't know who you are, don't expect to go into something, expect that person to accept this ideal that you've created for them to accept, because they'll just take you for who you are or what they see. And then when you then get down into it and then you discover these kind of different aspects of one another's lives, and then you think, oh, well, that's not my cup of tea, I'm going to leave. But then it's just like, but within that space you've decided to make decisions that have either led to a child or things have happened, and then you can't, it's not an off and on switch. Like, I think people think it's easy to just erase mistakes that they've made, but it's kind of, when it comes to a child, that's a whole human being, that's a whole future, that's a generation. It's kind of like, before that even becomes a thing, before you make a decision to be intimate with your partner, like, I'm not saying you need to know that they're the one. Like, obviously, like, when you're young, like, you explore, you meet different people and you go through that journey, but it's kind of like, where are you rushing to? Like, I know my aunties in my head, they were like, where are you rushing?
And that's it. And I agree 100%. I think, in a sense, we need to really look at one another, and actually see, and actually take our time to get to know one another. I think, especially a lot of younger generation, a lot of younger generation, you actually find single mothers. And these are young children now. We're talking from the ages of 16 all the way up to, maybe like 26 or so. There's a rise. Within those ages, there's a rise of single
100%.
mothers. I'm just like, that's the age as to where having a child, realistically, that should not even be the focus.
On your mind,
the focus realistically should be, how am I going to get my coins up?
Yeah.
How am I going to support myself?
Yeah.
Because you may get into a relationship and stuff like that, and you may want to be reliant on the man.
Yeah.
But guess what? At that type of age, the type of guy that you're going for, he's not going to really want to support himself and you at the same time.
Let
So
alone.
you know what I'm saying? So you also need to understand that, okay, cool, I need my career.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? I need to start, you know, doing things for myself.
Future.
Think about your future, you know, get your coins up. You need to be stable yourself. You know what I'm saying? Like, you can't go into a relationship expecting stability if you're not there yourself. You know what I'm saying?